the third question. Do you and the bots have any leads on the indigenous tribes, for example, the Maya, the Hopi, Don Alejandro, John Velo, Melchizedek, who appears to be, who is representing what they say, the famous calendar, and the Mayan revelations? End of question.
We do, and it's gained over the past 4 or 5 years, but I have a tendency to look at the stuff that I first discovered in 97 and 98 as being more pure before the whole 2012 issue started hitting mainstream and the mainstream debunkers and analysis that one might find on TV. So I have a lot of that actually came out in 97 and 98 in a database that I preserved because it was just so unusual and interesting. And I was aware even then of the Mayan calendar, although I didn't particularly give it much credence because the end date was so far away. I never really thought about it that much. But in 97 or 98, I kept getting this series of archetypes that I at one point I labeled "The Return" with the article "the" in capitals, because it appeared as though it was describing a returning condition or a revisiting. As opposed to something entirely new, if that makes sense. And it was at that point that I started thinking, oh, maybe this was discussing the Planet X kind of thing. 2 or 3 years later, when the Planet X stuff started taking a big jump into the internet, I thought, well, perhaps this 97 warning or data coming out was about that. However, now I'm quite sure that it's talking about that I probably shouldn't have labeled it as the return, but rather as the capture. And or the seizure or the melding or something along those lines. It's not a negative, but rather the word set I would use now is a joining. And the condition has been, we've been there before, but we've never bonded to it, if you can say it that way. Whatever it is, the data that we have now seems to suggest, all the way back from 97, seems to point to a period of time that we'll go through that no other level of, if we survive it and come out and do well, so to speak, humanity will not have to go through this test again. In other words, what I think is actually occurring is not only or not merely the cyclical returning to certain areas in space or the cyclical unwinding of certain conditions, but rather actually represents humanity at the bottom of a step. And if we are able to take that step, knowingly, eyes open, as sovereign individuals facing it all, and if we take that step, then we're off on an entirely different adventure. If we're not able to take that step, then universe will provide humanity trials, tribulations to grow, and will eventually get us back to where we face the bottom of that step again. And one way to look at it could be that we are at civilization level 0,0, and we're about to we have the opportunity to take the step and become a level 1 civilization, which would be pan solar system and reaching out into the galaxy and beyond. So at a material level, I think that is one of the ways in which it's going to manifest, that we are at the bottom of that step, and it's up to us to actually lift our feet and get up there. If enough of us can see the step, then we can do so. Make sense? End of statement.
That makes a lot of sense. That's a fantastically eloquent answer. Thank you very much for that. Now, one last one, a little bit more mathematical. I'm hoping you'll be able to shed some light on this. I'm no mathematician, although I'm a musician. They're similar. We currently work in base 10 mathematics, as far as I understand it. And I've heard that we might be better off working in base 12. Can you talk about this and the implications of this for pi, which is something I only grasp the understanding, but I do understand it. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. As a programmer, I actually don't work that often in base 10. Usually I'm working mathematically in hexadecimal at a base 16, or in ASCII, which is fundamentally a base 60 code. And as I translate words, and that's been shifted up to 256 characters with Unicode. So there is a whole lot of knowledge that comes through by not restricting yourself to base 10. However, I think that the differences are interesting and enlightening as you go through them, but an even greater level of mathematical understanding comes out of actually merging mathematics with music theory and going into string thought. And in that level of thought, one no longer attempts to reconcile the irrational numbers down to an approximation in a base 10. So in other words, who really cares what the numeric value of the irrational number of the square root of 5 might be? It is much more important and enlightening to be able to just use it as the square root of 5 and deal with the irrational number set, understanding them to be much more powerful and a bigger tool than one finds in rational numbers. End of statement. Make sense?
Very, very well said. Thank you so much. Okay, this is Michael again, and I'm now resuming a new line of inquiries from other friends that had posted questions ahead of time in our little zone forum network, and then new other additional lines of questions if you're ready. So this first one seems a little bit off message at first, but it's really not, and it comes from a friend who's actually here with us. That's Ross. That's this quote that we had by James from the Wingmakers. So I read just a quick intro, which is that the desire for more information and knowledge is a very powerful addiction of the human mind system. And then James of Wingmakers says, quote, I would advise that you turn your attention from the acquisition of information and knowledge and apportion it to the application of the heart virtues to yourself and all others within your local multiverse, and then simply listen to your breath, and each time you turn your attention to your breath, lean a little closer to the being inside you in the centermost point of your existence. End quote. So the first question is from Johnny here with us. What does your data suggest, or what is your personal take on the economic collapse in Scandinavia and Sweden in particular? Also, since the Baltic is an important vehicle for the economy in this region, what does your data suggest about Earth's changes in the area around the Baltic Sea in terms of the sea itself and the coastline? End of question.
Yes, the area of Scandinavia to a certain extent is isolated from the core of the collapse of the Anglo-American Empire. The maintenance of the Scandinavian currencies, even as they are separate slightly from the euro, is going to hold that amount of damage in abeyance. So let me put it another way. The more intense the bonding between any outlying province and the banking structure of the central empire, the worse it will be for that outlying province, as we saw in the case of the collapse of the currency and the social unrest in the rather staid and laid-back population of Iceland recently. So there is that as a warning. The American and Anglo-American Empire, what we think of as the central bank and warfare model of human existence, is dying. Whether any of us do anything about it or not, it will die. Its process of death is predetermined by its process of beginning, and the fact that we're at that end of dozens and dozens of cycles, which include the cycles that support that level of infrastructure. In addition to that, we have the problems that for that paradigm, the central bank and warfare model, it has run into a whole series of issues relative to the internet and the spread of knowledge about its even mere existence. So it's been pretty much predetermined. The collapse of it is going to be very horrific for the country that I'm in now, and will be less so actually for the Scandinavian countries, including, say, from even perhaps Holland, but certainly Denmark north, all over to Finland and into Russia.